Sponsorship for this program provided by the Ed and Dawn DeCarbo Funeral Home and Crematory Incorporated, with 2 locations, 941 South Mill Street, Newcastle, and 3000 Wilmington Road, Neshannock Township.
The most studied archaeological object in the history of the world.
Say that again for people.
The most studied archaeological object in the history of the world. And so when it comes to historical events, like what you're looking for is monumentum et documentum, right? That you have a monument and a document. And of course, we're all familiar that there are documents telling about Jesus's passion, but many people don't know about the shroud, at least to the degree that one can know. And so here's what happened with Emanuela. I stayed talking with her. She said, wait till you come back next week, because there's a physicist who'll be speaking.
Yeah, if you lost sleep last night,
yes, exactly.
up.
And he was just that way. His name is Paolo Di Lazzaro. He spent 5 years, this guy, just trying to reproduce by ultraviolet light.
That's amazing.
On a linen, just playing with the variables of light, amplitude, frequency, duration of exposure, so that he could recreate an image like that of the Man of the Shroud on another linen. Mm-hmm. And this guy made himself famous when he published an article saying that the amount of energy you would need to recreate a similar image would be 34,000 billion watts. And of course, you've probably bumped into this on the internet now. But
what does that look like?
Well, it's not a matter of what it looks like so much as, what it looks like.
Do?
Well, here's the trouble. You see, this is why it took 5 years, right? Because he took these different variables of light, trying to reproduce something caramel colored on a linen.
Yeah.
But it was frustrating because he got either nothing or just charred the linen altogether.
Yeah.
Which obviously we don't have.
I really want to get into that.
Yeah.
But I know we want to go into that in depth. So can we just start really basically? So when did you actually first see the shroud? Was it after you heard this lecture?
Yeah,
and then tell people what the shroud is. Give them the basic definition for those who are like, I think I know what it is, but
sure. Yeah, there's a lot there. We'll go slow. Sure. So I first bumped into this exhibit. I say the shroud talk by Marinelli. I want to say that was 2000 and is it 11? The first year that we started. I'm gonna have to think back to that. But I lost sleep, I told you, and met these different experts. They were wanting to explain what the shroud is, who the Man of the Shroud is, and what significance it had. All part of a Pontifical University's program to give you a panoramic view of shroud studies. So interdisciplinary. But the basic premise is that we'd been reverencing this cloth down through the ages as the burial shroud that wrapped the body of Jesus. So again, Jesus, of course, is on the cross on Good Friday, but he's taken down and then laid in the tomb. Well, when he's laid in the tomb, he's wrapped in these clothes. We should spend some time in that passage of John where it's written about.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But before, just to kind of lay it all out, the church proposes to have exactly that. At least that's what's on display in Turin, that is 4.5 hours north of Rome by the fast train. You can go and see this relic, which is on display in the cathedral there. And that's to say, it's inside of a case, and only on special occasions do they take. It's out of a double case, like in inert gas and constant temperature and pressure, never exposed to more than 50 lux of light. We want to preserve this thing for future generations. Now, so I started to meet those guys, the authorities, the ecclesial authorities in Turin, a few years later. So now I'm on Othonia as part of this non-for-profit, that's International Group for Shroud Study. And so I go there regularly. We just had a meeting a few weeks ago, but they have a shroud museum. They have an international study of shroud studies, and they provide many of the experts that teach at our Pontifical University. So at the one hand, you had this hub of study, like the minds that were involved in probing this document to understand its mysteries. And the other side, you had these museums that would kind of showcase or create a space of experience with the shroud. Those are two different kind of questions, right? Some people just know the image and they dive into prayer and contemplation through that. And that's one way to experience the shroud for sure. But another is to roll up your sleeves, get the experts on scene to study the physics, the chemistry, the biology, the forensic medicine, and then the history, the art history, there, like I say, so many different. So lead me where you want to lead me.
No, that's good. And we're going to get into all the objections to why the shroud may not be authentic. But when do we first have evidence in literature of the existence of the shroud?
Yeah, if you want to follow the paper trail backwards.
Paper or even icon trail, there might be images of it.
Right. So you're going to get different answers depending on what database you're looking at. But so many people point to the year 1354 because that was when it was on display in the hands of a certain Geoffroy de Charny in France, in Lirey. And we have his stamp, we have his seal, family crest. Nobody doubts that in 1354, what he was looking at and what was on display is the shroud, as we call it today, the Shroud of Turin. Prior to that, there's evidence, but it is controverted evidence. Like you say, it'll be things like icons. So a typical one is the Mount Sinai Pantocrator in St. Catherine's. And there...
Could we throw up the image of the shroud just so people can kind of see what we're talking about?
Yeah, in fact, I should describe what you're looking at there because it's not immediately obvious.
Which one is that?
Yeah, so let's look at, first do slide 6, okay? And I think at the top of the picture, you'll see a kind of tan or beige picture.
Would you be able to tilt
sure.
that a little?
And we'll zoom in on some of the particulars
perfect.
here.
Thank you. That's more than perfect. You don't have to give me that much.
Yeah, that's okay. So at the top, you see, this is a really long cloth. It's hard to see perhaps in our computer screen how wide this is, but this is 14 feet, so 13 foot 7 inches to be exact. And then 3 foot 7 is its height. So that's like 4.4 meters by 1.1 meters. And what you see on the left side of the linen is the frontal image of the body.
Right.
And then on the right side is the dorsal image of the body. So it actually wrapped all the way around. In fact, there's another picture that I've got in here. Let me pull it up. So this will explain very easily. Here we go. Go to slide 13. This is just a painting, but it shows this angel holding up in the clouds the linen. And just below the shroud is at the foot of the cross, you have Jesus wrapped in this cloth. It's simply to depict, it's kind of a didactic photo so you can understand how he was lying both on top of the body and then it's so long that it wraps around the back of his head, over his face, and over his stomach. So now when you unfold it, you get what is in the hands of the angel there.
When was that painting produced?
This is much later. I want to say it's the 16th or maybe 17th century.
Okay.
But it's simply a good way of visually understanding that it's only the inside of the cloth. Many people don't know this, that the shroud is colorized, it's imaged on only one side of the cloth. So it's the side that touches his body. And in fact, it's so superficial that if you were to just gently graze with a razor blade, you would erase the image of the man forever. This is what Paolo de Lazzaro discovered. If I can just dive a little detail, because this is so interesting. If you ask the question, like, what's the depth of penetration of coloration on the surface of the shroud? The answer is mind-boggling. It's 200 to 500 nanometers, which is, that's not even a number that I can fathom. So I give this example of a human hair. Like, take a single human hair. Imagine you could very carefully with your scissors cut it in half along its long end and discard that half. And now with what remains, try to cut it in half again. Do that 4 or 5 times until you're left with 1/16 or 1/20th of the width of a human hair. That's the depth of penetration.
And so as you say, that is on one side of the shroud, but not on the other.
In
so
fact,
if you were using some instrument to paint or imprint this image, you would likely see it on the other side.
That's right. There's nothing soaked into the fibers. In fact, that was one of the main questions. That was one of the main theories on the table when this gets tested. I'm sure we'll get into those testings in a moment. But one of the theories was that this was a painting, and so this was pigment, either organic or inorganic. Maybe it's a dye, maybe it's an ink of some sort. And so they had made a list of the chemical properties of all of the pigments known to man throughout history. And they do a certain test called pyrolysis mass spectroscopy that would not only find it, but identify its chemical composition. Well, sweeping the whole shroud, you don't find any of that. Not a single dose of little dot or drop of pigment, organic or inorganic. No varnish, no dye, no directionality whatsoever with which some liquid is applied to the cloth. And again, it doesn't soak into the fibers. It's like the blood stains do. You can see them on the other
fascinating.
side. A great experiment is to just take transmitted light, like just a regular light bulb, walk to the other side of the shroud, and you'll see the blood stains because now they'll be backlit.
Yes.
And you'll see them all the more. But guess what you won't see?
The image of the man.
The body image of the man. It just disappears. It's so superficial and so frail that it's overpowered by just simple light on the other side. And so this is what we're unable to produce today, even artificially, even after all this study. Even though the 2023 now, we don't have a micro laser capable of delivering a micro burn this precise. And so the obvious question is, how in the world did this come into being? Like, what's the genesis of this enigmatic image?
Before we get further, I know that people are going to come in with these thoughts of, wasn't this disproved? So it might be helpful to show why that isn't the case before we go on to kind of assuage people's...
Right, let's do that. Okay, so slide 3 here shows some pictures. This is probably what you saw on Front Page News in 1988.
Look
pictures
at that.
Of Dr.
That must
Michael
frustrate me
Tait.
so much looking at that.
Can you see the 1260-1390 exclamation part? That's the exclamation part that really, it just screams academic excellence and propriety, doesn't it?
Yes.
These same guys with this very composed stance with their arms folded before these like pillars. It just says these same guys got what's the number? I'm going to forget like how many million in sterling they got for their new museum. Like the next day, it's a matter of the public record. The moment this was published, they were able to build their new laboratory. Some stuff was very fishy from the start, but it's just the case that across the world, Front Page News everywhere was the Turin Shroud it's been proven to be a medieval fake. It tells us nothing, therefore, about Jesus' sufferings. It can't be considered a relic, etc., etc. And so if you still believed that the shroud was real after this point, you might as well believe that the earth is flat. You're about the same category. And my heart just goes out for those people who are serious students, the ones who had dedicated hundreds of thousands of hours, especially the team from STIRP in 1978. These guys had published already over 20 peer-reviewed scientific journal articles. They knew from the start to be suspicious of this.
Really?
But what I like, and this I would lead with this now, is that as of 2017, we have a published article that shows that the conclusions from 1988 are no longer sustainable. So I should say that again, the very publication, Archaeometry, out of Oxford, that published this 1260 to 13, it said that conclusion can no longer be sustained. And I'm
sure that hit the front pages all around the world too, right?
Right. No, exactly. So although it is a matter of mainstream science, so if you want to find in the literature, you're going to bump into this. The French researcher who published this article is Tristan Casabianca, another friend of ours who teaches at our university. And he goes into all the details. It's a fascinating story. But I want to say it was in 2017 that according to the Freedom of Information Act, these laboratories were compelled by law to release the raw data that shows how heterogeneous were their individual results. Because there was Oxford, Zurich, Oxford, and Arizona. Those were the 3 laboratories. And the idea was that they were going to publish independently and that their particular results, but that didn't happen. They lumped them together and gave us this big arc, 1260 to 1390, 95% sure that this is the time period from which the shroud hails, and so it's fake. But the bottom line is that they use a sample from the top left corner of the shroud, which we know to be anomalous. It's just not representative of the rest of the shroud. And we knew that, and we had proof of that 10 years prior. You would think somebody would have the sense.
Do you think they knew that?
Well, they ought to have known. That much we know. We knew, though, that in the moment that they're cutting the sample, 8 centimeters of the most prized relic in all of Christendom, and of course you know that with carbon dating, you carbonize, that is, you destroy, you put into a fire, basically, this cloth, never to be seen again. And so you'd think you'd be very careful. Like, compare that to the STIRP team, this Shroud of Turin research project of 1978. For a whole year, they prepare just so all of their tests will be non-invasive, non-destructive. And yet here, we're about to destroy forever 8 centimeters, and they don't know where they're going to take the sample 2 hours prior to the experiment. And it's all on videotape. In Italy, there was a documentary that came out just telling this whole fiasco, and it's called La Notte della Sindone. It's the night of the shroud. And you know who does the narrating, if I'm not mistaken, is the same actress. I'm going to forget her name now, who plays the devil in The Passion of the Christ. Yeah. So it's got some fun imagery there. It's a little
on the nose.
Yeah, exactly. It's a little edgy, but the fact is I can understand why some people were upset. But here's the thing. Even if you think that those laboratories did good science, and I'm willing to be benevolent and say as much, even if they did perfect science, they did so on a sample that tells us literally nothing about the rest of the shroud. Like, you could look at the chemical composition, like you can see a map, what's called a brightness map from the UV fluorescence. Like, turn off the lights, shine UV, capture what fluoresces, and it tells you about the chemical composition of the cloth. It's all uniform. It's all like orange hues, maybe a little yellow, a little red, but it's not forest green. But that's exactly what color it is in that top left corner. Like, a little kid in kindergarten can point to that and say, look, Mom, that part is different. And yet this is where these, world-renowned scientists are using to date the shroud. It's just...
So why not take another piece of the shroud and carbon date that? Wouldn't that be enough to prove what you want to prove?
Yes, except that you can imagine that after this very embarrassing episode, many people are hesitant to go that way. I think the church would be, remember, it's the church that's paying for this. Cardinal Ratzinger at the time was saying, yeah, these are protocols. Absolutely. Let's do 7 samples, 7 laboratories.
About how much does that cost?
Yeah, I have no idea. That I didn't see. But and sadly, that got reduced to first 3 samples and then 1. And then they published together against their own protocols.
Were these fellas alive when it got retracted?
That I don't know, because here we are 30 years later. So 2017, it's like...
Oh, that's when the same publishing outfit retracted it.
Yeah, it may even be 2019 by the time that gets published. 2017, I think, is when the first research is done. And then, but it's worth looking up, even on the internet. You can find or on shroud.com. That's like the mecca of all scientific data.
What's it called? The Shroud?
Just shroud.com.
Do you mind putting that in Thursday?
Yeah, so that's led by Barry Schwartz, who is the teacher. So right after I was telling you, I met Emanuela, then Paolo, and then Barry Schwartz. He's got a light